Yes, I
Yes.
did. All right, let's go.
All right.
Okay, this started out about 3 to 4 years ago when a cousin that I have in Northern California who knew that I was a photographer sent me an email and said, I have a cousin who is a photographer and he has a newsletter. Would you like to subscribe? So I subscribed in the last 3 or 4 years. I've been very pleasantly able to see these wonderful photographs and that of Jeff's. Jeff is the official photographer of the Iditarod, which if you don't know what that is, it's a sled race across Canada once a year. He's been doing this since 1982. He one time formed Alaska's largest stock photo agency and subsequently sold that in 2012. He has multiple books that he's produced. He produces calendars each year. He also has limited groupings of photographers that he takes on trips to Alaska to photograph animals, wildlife, and all of that kind of stuff. So I'd like to introduce to you Mr. Jeff Schultz from Anchorage, Alaska.
Very
Welcome.
good. Thanks so much. Thanks so much for the introduction. And that's pretty much who I am. I've been a full-time professional since 1982, moved up to Alaska in 1978, 3 months after graduating high school from the Bay Area of California, because in my opinion, the Bay Area at the time had too many people and too much pavement. And my idea of a good time was to be out in the woods. Yosemite was my stomping ground, so I went there all the time. So I'm going to just jump right in, and I'm going to share my screen and go to a PowerPoint presentation. Is there any reason I shouldn't just jump right in?
Just answer one question. I thought the
Wonderful.
Iditarod was in Alaska.
Correct. Yes, that was Alan misspoke there. It's a 1,049-mile race. Takes 9 to 14 days, depending on if you're fast or slow, from Anchorage to Nome.
Oh,
And
okay.
it's quite an event. I've been fortunate to be the official photographer since '82, which is great. All right, so I'm sharing my screen with desktop 1. And can you see a PowerPoint presentation?
Yes.
Yes.
We do.
Yes.
How's that look?
Fantastic.
Perfect.
Yep.
All right, great. And for those of you who are veterans, thank you very much for your service. I'm grateful. So I'm just going to jump right in. This is the talk that I'm going to give is something I give to my photo tours. I only do 3, maybe 4 at the most, 1 week to 2 week photo tours with 6 people, and then I do a number of private tours.
Wow.
So I contend that the weather and the wildlife wait for no man. That's my bottom line. So my motto and all that is go fast, go light, and go simple. That's the way I do my photography for a long time. Some of you may recall the famous commercial photographer in New York, Jay Mizell, who said, the more equipment you have, the less pictures you make. And I'm all about that. The more gizmos I see my clients use, the more they're frustrated that they don't get the picture because they're monkeying with some stuff. So I contend that great photography is this successful marriage of both art and science. Can you guys see me as well?
Yes.
No, yes.
All right, so I can use some gestures then. All right, so to me, the art is what comes from my heart. It's just what I think is a good idea or a good photograph. And the science is all that other crap that we have to figure out, which is f-stop, shutter speeds, filters, and all that other jazz. I contend that I can do good pictures and you can too with a smartphone. There's certain things you can't do because it doesn't have all the science attached to all of it, but even that's getting better and better. So in any case, the art expresses your vision or my vision. And so I contend that if you like the picture, it's good. Don't let me or anyone else tell you otherwise. This is one of my all-time favorite landscape photos. Super simple image, but I love it. Some people look at it and go, really? That's your favorite? And I say, yeah. So I like it, so it's good. Doesn't matter what anybody else thinks. I may not win an award with it, and that doesn't matter either, or get it published. The only difference, the only odd thing about this is that it was a 70-second exposure, which made the clouds a little bit more blurry, more painterly, I'll say, as well as the water. It softened out the water. So these are just a few of these are what I think is a good photograph. This is a Jeff Schultz photo. Small animal, big landscape. I love that stuff. That's kind of my signature. You'll see it especially on my Iditarod photos. Doesn't mean it's good, but I was thrilled to death with this shot. I love doing long exposures of the stars. Night sky photography, I love doing, especially the aurora up here. Wildlife, for the longest time, I loved wildlife photography, but when I started the stock photo agency, everybody and their brother was shooting wildlife. So, and we didn't sell very much of it. So I didn't even do wildlife photography for many, many years after I started the agency. Landscape photography, I can sit here, and look at God's creation all day long, every day. This is a place I take almost all of my photo tour clients, which we helicopter into this location. This is in our backyard.
Wow.
I can mountain bike about 4 minutes to get to this spot from the parking lot, 20 minutes from our house.
Wow.
So love it. Again, I love the small animal, big landscape stuff. Everything's coming through okay as far as the screen share?
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Beautiful.
Okay. Now this could have been shot in, Mississippi or anywhere else, but I still love the long exposure idea. When I was growing up and went to Yosemite, I did a lot of long exposure photography, but back then I didn't even know anything about neutral density filters or anything. And I just got the longest exposure I could at the lowest ISO at the smallest aperture. Now, this is one of my all-time favorites also. This is just an oblique aerial picture. I'm probably 1,000 feet in the air. If you were to walk across or measure across this is probably, I don't know, 3/4 to 1.5 miles wide, this creek. And this, I just love, this is my kind of photography. And this, again, is a long exposure to soften out the water. It's probably, I don't know, a 30-second exposure or some such. And then, of course, we have the kick butt aurora up here. I shot this just about 3 weeks ago on a private photo tour. This guy was fortunate. He made enough money that we made it so that I gave him 5 days notice. It's going to be clear and the aurora is going to be out. So come on up. And he made a 5-day tour of it. And this is Denali right there in the center, right? This spot right here is Denali. So that was pretty impressive. Anyway, and then this is my all-time favorite Iditarod photo. This is on the cover of my book called Chasing Dogs.
My God.
Chasing Dogs,
Are you in a helicopter?
airplane, same thing, only different.
Okay.
We're trying to time a 120-mile-an-hour airplane with an 8-mile-an-hour dog team. So that's exciting. But so this was my all-time favorite Iditarod photo. It's on the cover of Chasing Dogs, and it's been well received. It's won a couple of awards. Matter of fact, I won the Santa Fe Photo Workshops. They had a contest on water. You could submit water photos, and I submitted this, and it won the grand prize, which, anyway, it's just frozen ice. All right, so moving along, I contend there's 3 aspects to photography that are non-negotiable. Good composition. If the photo's not good, I'm not going to look at it. So, period. Proper focus and sharp images. Unless you specifically want an image out of focus or blurry, it needs to be sharp. And then proper exposure. This day and age with digital photography, you can get away with a lot where you're underexposed. But as a professional, I need to have my photos exposed spot on the money for the most part, or else I introduce noise when somebody blows it up into a big image. So those are 3 things that I care about. So the composition, again, is the art. And to me, it makes or breaks a photo. We've all heard of leading lines in a photo, but I also contend that many parts of an image has weight to it. And that weight, whether it's something big, dark, something big, black, white, it will attract or detract my attention to it. And so I'm looking at those things that are weighty in a photo or a leading line. making sure, as you guys all know, not to send somebody out of the photo. That's the whole idea. So because this image, because this subject rather, even though it's inanimate, can move, I need to give it room to move. Otherwise, in my mind, I'm thinking, well, that thing's going to move. And if it's bumping up against the edge, it's going to drive people nuts, drives me nuts anyway. Leading lines, we've all heard of that, where we're leading into the photo here. And then these line, an S curve is always kind of cool in a photo. This is an aerial picture. And then the crevasses of this glacier pointing up kind of leads a person around and around. We've all seen this rule of thirds, and I never consciously use it, but it's funny when I overlay something like this on one of my photos, oftentimes the main subject is up here in the upper left or upper right or something like that. Like I did a lot of editorial photography for magazines and doing portraits outdoors on location. So upper left-hand side, the bear's looking into the frame. The moose likewise looking into the frame, giving it room to move, giving it room to look. The caribou moving itself downhill in the fog. Same thing, just giving it room to move. And this is an aerial shot from the helicopter. My eye goes everywhere in this photo, which is a good thing sometimes, not necessarily always, but it's a good thing. Likewise, this is the same location as the last image, just a different time of year. I love this type of stuff. Now, like I said, I like the big landscape, the wide stuff, but here's a case where I used a telephoto lens, probably a, 135 or 200 millimeter. Oftentimes on my photo tours, we pull up to a location and somebody inevitably says, well, what lens should I bring? And the bottom line for me is I always carry two bodies, both full frames. They happen to be Canon, it doesn't really matter. One has 100 to 500 on it and the other has a 24 to 105. And then I'll put a 16 to 35 in my pocket. If I have those three lenses, I can do anything. And I contend I can't know what you want to shoot. So it really depends. I say, bring it all, bring two bodies, two lenses, and have a nice day. You'll make it work. So back to the composition part. Images that are left out are just as important in what you put in. I'm always struggling, especially when photographing rocks and things like that. How much of a rock do I keep in? Which ones do I have to let out? But one thing that I really, I was impressed with when a friend of mine told me is, consider the edges and especially the corners of an image to be sacred ground. So when I'm composing an image, most often than not, that's where I'm looking, is the edges and corners to make sure there's not something poking in or poking out of an image that will draw a person's eye out of it. That's a big deal to me. So hopefully that makes sense to everybody.
Mm-hmm.
So here's a couple examples. Which photo do you like best? That's a rhetorical question, but I show these to my clients and say, which one's best? There is no right answer, because if I have a group of 6 people, inevitably someone is going to choose one of these images and 3 or 4 will choose another one. But anyway, well, which do you like better? I could contend that this bothers me because there's not quite enough of it. If I had more of this, then it could lead me in. But also I contend that with the moose farther on the right here than this one down here, I like the placement of the moose better in the upper photo. This one, the moose to me is too close to the center right here. So all I'm saying is, look around the frame when you're shooting. And honestly, the best bet for me at least is to put more in the frame than less and crop later, especially with the amount of information we have in our sensors these days. That's not a big issue. Used to be a problem cropping in when you're shooting Ektachrome 400 or some such. Anybody remember that?
Yeah.
So which photo do you like better? I would contend that the one in this one has that little stick up there, which draws my attention. That's got this big hunk of dark has weight to it. So that draws my attention to start with. And then this little thing because it's dark and light right there, my eye is drawn to that, and it shouldn't be because the photo's over here, right? So I contend that this is better. Now, I wish I would have just moved this stick in both photos, because I contend that's a bother. It's not only bright, but it's coming right out of the camera, which again draws my eye to it. So I don't think either photo is the perfect photo. All right, which one do you like better? Top one or bottom one? I go back and forth on this all the time. I would contend, because the top one has the mountain cut off up here, it does help me lead into it a little more, but also at the same time, because this is dark and has weight to it, now my eye is drawn up there, and it wants to see what's going on in that mountain, and there's nothing going on. So down here, it kind of helps it a little bit more. But I really love this leading line here, leading me into the frame quite a bit. Anyway, so I argue with myself when I'm out there photographing all the time. I just go, get over it and just shoot a stinking picture and get on with it. But I love being out in the outdoors, so I don't mind taking the time to just sit here and have a good day. Now, another thing I contend also is separation. To me, separation is huge. When I'm first editing my photos, I'm looking at them in Lightroom really small. And if it grabs my attention when it's small, then it's going to grab my attention when it's big. When I look at this photo, if I hesitate here because I'm going, what the heck is this? That's not good. All I did was move 2 or 3 feet to the right to make it obvious that this is a person, and that she has a head, and it's not part of this iceberg back there. So to me, separation is a huge thing. Sometimes that's just raising the tripod or the camera up 6 inches or moving left or right. Or in this particular case, I just waited another 20 seconds, 30 seconds for the moose to move over just a little bit. Night and day difference.
Mhm.
So if it looks good small, it'll look good big. One of my pet peeves, and I've been talking about this for years, is too much sky. I contend there doesn't need to be any sky in the photo unless it's a super sky, or there's just some need for it to be there. In this particular case, to me, this is a bad picture to begin with, just because the horizon's right almost dead center. But there are some neat clouds up here. But there's so much dead space here, right? That's some nice clouds, but with as much dead space here, I don't need that. So literally, I just moved the camera down. To me, that's night and day difference.
Mhm.
Absolutely night and day. That's just a snapshot, and this is a little more of a picture. Anybody want to argue with me?
Mhm.
All right. Okay, but if the sky is cool, well, let's make it all about the sky then. This is just a really nice sky. Similar to that photo I talked about earlier, that was my favorite landscape. This is a long exposure too, just trying to make the clouds painterly. So originally I shot just a normal exposure, handheld, maybe at 2/50th of a second. It didn't appeal to me. So I said, well, let's put a filter on it. And I did a 30-second exposure, but the clouds were moving so slow, you could barely tell that anything was going on. So I put a 15-stop filter on this, made a 4-minute exposure. 4-minute exposure in daylight, which now it looks a little more painterly. Some people don't like that. I've had some people tell me, Jeff, the long exposure is not for me. I said, that's fine. I'll get over it and I won't die mad. This I think is much better than just sharp clouds. Some people would argue that, well, Jeff, you don't put much sky in your photos. Matter of fact, that contest I won for Santa Fe workshops, I won a workshop. So I went there and did a landscape photography workshop, wanted to see what someone else was teaching. And I showed the guy my calendar and I said, just give me your critique. He said, well, Jeff, for the most part, I really like your photography, but you don't put enough sky in your pictures. I went, okay, I'll get over it. I won't die mad. Anyway, so this is Denali with some moose. This is, there's a real quick backstory. This is on a photo tour. I've got 6 clients with me. I wake them all up at 4 o'clock in the morning in August and say, hey, Denali's out. We're going to catch first light on it. Get your buttses out of bed and let's set up. We're set up at this pond. We've got our graduated neutral density filters on. Everybody's on a tripod. And I mean, it's just perfect. And then in walked the moose. I mean, you couldn't ask for anything better. That was totally, I mean, you can't plan something like that, but to have graduated filters on, everything's set up and you're on a tripod, it was wonderful. All right, so further, when I do come across something like this, which I think there's way too much sky, there's a bunch of crud down here in the bottom. Well, I don't waste the photo. I try to do something purposeful with it and just crop it different. Cropping it into a panoramic saves my bacon. And, you know, this day and age with sensors as big as they are, you can crop a full frame image to a panoramic and get away with it and blow it up pretty big. You don't necessarily have to take a panoramic where you're shooting, you know, vertical, you know, 6 or 8 or however many vertical shots. Certainly that helps to get all the data you can, but you can still pull it off with something like this. All right, so all of those things I just talked through, typically I'll put this on the screen and I'll say, okay, now tear this apart. What don't you like about this from everything I just told you? Because we're on a Zoom, I'm just gonna jump in and tell you. I don't like the separation. The plane looks like it's part of the background. There's way too much sky. I've got this white rock in the lower left that's bothering me because it's white and it's sticking right out of the corner. I've got these black rocks here, which are weighty. I've got this gentleman's fly fishing and his line is going to cast out of the frame, you know, and there's no place for the plane to move and the propeller is coming right out of his back. There's probably some other things I could mention, but so the bottom line here is do something different. So we had just landed here and it's a brand new place I'd never been to. I was freaking out because it was so pretty. So I shot this and then I looked at it and went, this sucks. So I did that. I walked up the hill. I got rid of those rocks. There's separation now for the airplane. You know, if you're in a river or a creek or something, there's now the sky doesn't have weight to it. It just, you know, ends where the mountains end. So to me, that's a better photo. And the line is going to find a place to land here and hopefully catch a fish. Any quick questions? I'm plowing fast, but I want to give you as much information as I can. Looking good? Okay. All right. So of these 3 pictures, which do you like best? You know, to me, that's the bottom line, I guess, is which one do you like best?
Middle.
The middle. All right.
Center.
All right. So I've given these to usually 6 people and somebody will like all of them. You know, one person will like, at least one person will like all of them. I think this image.
All right.
Okay, thank you. I think this image could have been better in the middle if I'd gone with a longer exposure. I think that because the water's sharp here, if I would have used a long exposure and that could have led me into the frame better. I don't like this one just because the rocks are cut off here. There's bright water on the bottom. It just bothers me. I want to see more of it. So this is seeing more of it and this is seeing none of it. All right, so then there's the science of photography. That's the art of photography. So composition and science, the camera angle and perspective. So where are you in relation to the subject and what lens do you choose? Nice thing now is with zoom lenses, we can have a lot of focal lengths at our beck and call. So this creek, all these photos are made within 50 feet of each other. So it's just a matter of moving around and looking and see what you like best. So what lens I use depend on where I'm at and what I'm doing. This little waterfall here and this rock here is the same one as this, but I wanted to get more flowers in the photo, so I moved over. So what I'm saying is, you know, you guys know this already. Move around, find the spot that you like best. Now, wildlife photography. If you've never photographed a brown bear before, you'd say, well, this is kind of neat. It's interesting. It's not fantastic. It's up close and personal. But this is the reason that I say that I always walk around with 2 camera bodies, 100 to 400 and a 24 to 105 or 24 to 70. Because just 2 seconds after I took this, I didn't have to switch lenses and I took that literally 2 seconds later. And to me, this is the shot. I mean, that's just kind of boring bears on a beach. But here, wow, they're in their element. And to me, it says it all. So which lens do you choose? I have a dozen lenses maybe, but I only really need 3. So take a look at this. I hired a dog team. I wanted to get a picture of Denali, Mount McKinley here with a dog team in it. It's something I did way back in the 80s with the founder of the Iditarod, Joe Reddington. And I wanted to do it again on better equipment and better film. So I hired a dog team and they ran across this swamp right where my cursor is going. You can see where the trail comes in here. And they ran in front of me here. This is the spot that I'm set up for the next 5 or 6 photos. And they just ran around in a circle and just kept going because I was going to use different focal lengths, do verticals and horizontals, the whole 9 yards. So I'm set up here, and here's the first image, 35 millimeter. The idea here is to see how big Denali in the Alaska range gets. So at 35 millimeter, you got that. 67 millimeter, oh my goodness. Now, Denali's looking bigger and better. And then with the dog team across the swamp, 112 millimeter, even bigger. And then 184 millimeter. To me, that's like, wow, that's the photo for me. But so I can tend 2 things. One is that in landscape photography, a lot of people say, oh, I just need my wide angle. I say, no, you need the lens that's going to work best for the situation you're in. So in this particular case, even if the dog team wasn't there, this would be one of the photos I'd want to have. Certainly, I'd want to do some of these others as well, but I'd probably crop them into panoramas because there's a lot of dead space here if there wasn't a dog team there. So you guys are old enough to remember, like me, that I was told that when you use a telephoto lens, things get compressed. Is that right?
Right.
Right. Okay. Well, that's what I thought up until I took that photo class from the guy at Santa Fe. I thought the same thing. They compress. That's why I use a telephoto lens. This guy was so brilliant. His name's Glenn Randall. Maybe you guys have heard of him. But anyway, this guy is he is left brain, but he's also right brain. He knows the square root of any aperture and everything. Any case, so he shows me that, well, it's not true, Jeff, because here's a picture taken at 35 millimeter. Notice how I cropped here, right? So this is the crop I did for the next frame. This is shot with 35 millimeter focal length. And there it is. Obviously, it's not going to be sharp, and it's going to be a little skewed because of the focal length being a wider angle. But if you put it side by side with that 160 millimeter, there it is. So it's not, in other words, you can compress things just by shooting wider and cropping in. Now this was a big deal to me to learn because I'm always thinking, well, I want everything to be bigger, but I need to use a backup and use a telephoto lens. And especially like to get more depth of field. This is what would be a good time for that, where I could use a wider angle lens, get more depth of field, and then crop in on it and make everything look closer together. So that was a game changer for me. So there you go. All right. Next thing is proper focus and sharp images. So anybody here not use back button focus?
I use it.
Everybody uses back button focus? No.
No.
So
No, I don't. I should.
all right. When someone first told me about back button focus, I said, oh, that sounds great. I'll try it. And I wanted to shoot myself because it was so hard. I couldn't figure it out. But the more I shoot wildlife photography or street photography candids, back button focus is great, provided I keep it in AI servo for Canon or autofocus continuous for other cameras. That way, I can mash the back button, it focuses, I can let off the button and recompose the image and it stays in focus. Or I could, if the subject is moving, I can keep the back button down and in autofocus continuous or AI servo, as the subject moves, as long as my focus point is on the subject, it's staying in focus. I used it just the other day on an assignment for a magazine where I had a person snowshoeing and they're moving constantly. Anyway, something to consider. So You definitely want to use it with AI server or AI autofocus continuous. And again, there's no more need to focus and recompose. It's especially handy in night sky photography when you don't want to refocus. You know, you focus one time and you're good for the whole night. Because when I use my Canon cameras, if I'm not in back button focus, then when I use my cable release, it will try to focus. And that's not a pleasant thing. In other words, I don't have to constantly switch from manual focus to autofocus on my lenses when I use back button focus. So there you go. Did I bore somebody? They're out of here?
No.
Okay. So the main subject needs to be in focus. So I'm constantly moving my focus points. You know, here's where my focus point is. Nowadays, you can probably use eye tracking focus, but if the moose doesn't have an eyeball showing, what do you do? So, and we know in wildlife photography, the eyeballs should be in focus. So I'm constantly moving my focus point or using eye tracking focus, unless I intentionally want it to be out of focus or show movement. So this is one of those cases you've probably seen other photographers where I call it kicking the tripod during a long exposure. You know, some people think it's artsy, some people think it's a mistake. I think it is what it is. This is handheld, but anyway, birch trees in the forest. It's a longer exposure. I intentionally did that, right or wrong, good or bad. It's up to you guys. Or a panning photo, you know, panning to make the background blurry on purpose. So manually moving my focus point or using eye tracking focus. So stopping the action, that's the big deal.
That's nice.
So when I do use my focus points and I'm not using eye tracking focus, I have to make darn sure that my focus point is on the eyeballs, or, you know, these animals are in 3 different planes of focus and I'm using a 400mm lens, so I don't have much depth of field. But if I move my focus point just a little bit to get better composition, I'm out of luck completely, because I move the focus point onto his shoulder, which throws the focus in the back, and now everything in front of it is out of focus because we know we have more depth of field behind the focus point than we do in front of the focus point. So I'm also changing my focus point areas based on what I'm shooting. You guys probably do the same thing. So I'm shooting something still, street photography, or an animal like a moose that's not moving. I'm just using a single spot, or with landscape photography. But I'm photographing this bear who's moving all over the place. So I'm using an expanded focus area. And then with birds, I'm typically using 9 points of focus, shifting this whole focus point over to the upper left because it's going left to right. You know, this particular frame I shot, or particular bird, immature bald eagle, I shot 24 frames. I think I got 3 of them in focus, and I'm shooting 14 frames a second. So it takes a little bit of work and a lot of luck. So another thing about creating sharp images, it's not just about focus, it's also hand holding it. If possible, I like to use a tripod whenever I can, but I always say, oh, I can hand hold it. And I shoot it at 2/50th of a second, and invariably I say, it's not sharp. Or telephoto lenses with too slow of a shutter speed. I'm oftentimes doing that. Even now, still making that mistake, like this particular time. I'm shooting a 400mm handheld in a boat, and I'm at 100th of a second.
Oh,
I mean, that's silly. My rule of thumb is at least double the focal length and add a little bit. So 1.5 times. So 400mm, I'm typically at 1,000th of a second. But for whatever reason, I screwed up. And then immediately figured I screwed up. So I just moved it. You know, I had to increase the ISO. This day and age with such good sensors, the ISO 2000 is not a big deal. You'll see an image here in a minute that was shot at 12,000 ISO, and it looks fine. So I also contend that I want to get sharp images, I want to shoot high continuous frames a second and get a lot, shoot at least 2 or 3 images, even if the subject is standing still. Because I find typically that when I press the shutter button, I'm moving the camera just a little bit, and oftentimes I'll get camera blur just from that. So if I can click and hold the button down for 2 or 3 frames. Typically the second or third one is going to be sharper. And then using back button focus, I'll refocus, using my thumb, refocus again on the subject, just in case it has moved or I've moved. Proper exposure. I could talk a lot about proper exposure, but I'm just going to, Alan told me that most of you are advanced amateurs, so I'm going to just dwell on this real briefly, and that is Ansel Adams, in his zone system, he exposed his film and processed his film in such a way that he would get detail even in the whitest of whites, unless they were, unless it was a picture of the sun and he couldn't, and the darkest of darks, he would try to get detail there, which was the zone system, which is just like that. Middle gray we know is middle gray. It's no different than us now, only we only have five areas instead of 10, but it's the same thing. So if you were to look at the back of your LCD, there's no way in the world to know which exposure is best. No way to know. The only way to know is if you use your histogram. And the one thing I've learned over the years, that there's more information on this right-hand side than there is on the left-hand side. So there's less pixels over here. So if I underexpose a photo and all, the histogram is way here on the left side, and I just increase the exposure, the pixels start getting further and further away, and they just make more and more noise. So I as a professional, I'm going to expose it to the far right as I can get it, no matter what the exposure is, or rather, no matter what the scene is. I'm going to expose it as far to the right as I can, and then adjust it in Lightroom as I go. Certainly when I'm shooting winter landscapes, I'm always over here on the right-hand side because the snow needs to be white and should be white. So when I shoot pictures and I'm going, fast and furious, this is how the back of my camera is always set up. Because if it's up to me to get good composition, just by looking at the frame, shouldn't be what determines whether it's good composition. But I can't know what the exposure is unless I look over here and see this. This day and age with some mirrorless cameras, you get to see that histogram before you shoot, which is a big bonus this day and age. But in any case, I'm always making sure that my exposure is as good as it can get. This is that image. This is the image that was shot at ISO 12,800. Why in the world would you shoot at 12,800? Because it's early in the morning. Let me back up a second. I'm going to kind of teach two things here. This is shot early in the morning, and the bottom line is, with every photo I take, and I suggest every photo you take, think about what's your end game. What's the point of the photo? You want a lot of depth of field? Do you need a lot of depth of field? Do you want to stop the action? What exactly is it? Do you want to isolate the subject from the background? What's the end game of the photo? What do you want the person to come away with feeling or seeing? And so with this particular one, I just wanted to get a sharp photo because it's early in the morning. So my end game, it's always going to be good composition. It's always going to be proper focus, and it's always going to be proper exposure. That's just my end game all the time. So in this particular case, it's early in the morning. I'm with a 400 millimeter lens. I'm handheld. I'm at a 1/25th of a second, 5.6 because it's a 400 millimeter zoom, and ISO 3200. Well, I can't handhold a 400 millimeter lens at a 1/25th of a second. So I'm going to introduce another concept to you that I never would have thought of in a million years, and that's use auto ISO. But in any case, so because it was a 400 millimeter lens, I wanted to get at least a 500th of a second. Typically, I'd want a 1,000th of a second. But when I saw the ISO go to 12,800 at a 500th of a second, I thought, well, that's good enough. So I handheld it at a 500th of a second in order to get it sharp. That's all I cared about at the time. And this image was published in my calendar. You'd never know in a million years that it's that high of an ISO. And this was before Topaz. I didn't use Topaz, whatever, sharpening and all that. I've only started using the Topaz stuff the last couple of years, and I don't use it that often, quite frankly. But in any case, so as you know, there's three variables with proper exposure. You have aperture, shutter speed, and ISO, but the sad part is we only get to pick two of them. The amount of light that is there is going to dictate what the third is going to be at. So that just falls back into what's the point of the photo, right? If it's low light, but it's a subject's not moving, well, you can get away, and you have a tripod, you can get away with a longer exposure. But so I'm always battling all those different elements to figure out what exactly I want to make happen. So I say, consider using auto ISO. Who here has not used auto ISO?
I always use it.
You do?
I never use it.
Yeah. So up until about 4 years ago, I would have never in a million years thought of using auto ISO, but it's fantastic for two reasons. If you have a fast moving subject and you want to hold your aperture for depth of field or your shutter speed for a telephoto lens, using auto ISO is an absolute friend. And especially with the sensors we have, and it will depend on which sensor you have. Obviously, if you have a 5-year-old Canon Rebel, it's not going to work for you. Question?
No, keep going.
Okay, so this particular photo, I'm at 1,000th of a second, f8. Now, that's what I wanted. That was my end game. I wanted 1,000th of a second because I'm with typically a 400 millimeter lens when I'm shooting these bears. And f8, gives me the illusion I'm going to have a little more depth of field. I don't really, but ended up on auto ISO is at ISO 200. I turn around and then there's shade. And this guy was doing this. If I would have stayed at ISO 200, I would have been at a 1/25th of a second, and this guy would have been totally blurry. So I'm stuck at 1,000th and I'm stuck at f8. And now this is using manual exposure. And then using auto ISO, it's ISO 1600. So what? 1600 is not a big deal. Any case, so I contend that if you're shooting street photography or wildlife, something to consider. Landscape photography, I'd never do it in a million years. I'm trying my best to stay at ISO 100. I mean, if I could shoot everything under the sun at ISO 100, I would, but there's times when I can't. So look at this photo. This is once in a lifetime. I mean, this is crazy.
Wow.
You've got it. This is a sow grizzly bear with 3 grizzly cubs. For whatever reason, this bald eagle pair decided to either build their nest on a fallen tree or use an old nest. I have no idea which. And then when we're in a boat down below. So this eagle's defending the nest. The sow's going, well, there must be something good in the nest. This eagle is dive bombing the bear, and this raven, you might not be able to see it very well. There's a raven there dive bombing the eagle. I mean, this is crazy. This is a once in a lifetime. So I bring this up because this is a time where I don't want to mess around. I'm in manual at 1,000th of a second, wide open at 5.6, 400 millimeter. I'm shooting 200 frames during this time. Look at this. The eagle's still there. The bear's coming down. Look at it. The eagle makes contact with the bear. Unbelievable. I mean, everybody's always told me, man, I'd love to get a picture of a bald eagle with a bear. Yeah, right. This is crazy. And the cubs. Any case, the bear stayed in the nest a little while. We couldn't see what was in it, but we never saw chicks moving, like to get out of the way. So we think they were just eggs. This was in early June, very early June. So it could have been just eggs or freshly hatched. But in any case, we never knew what was in there, but we know there was something. We didn't see feathers flying or anything like that. But wow, what a situation. Huh? All right. So how to make exposures? How are we doing on time? Wow, I should be out of time here. So how much time? What's that?
No problem. We'll give you a 2-hour extension if you need.
Yeah, that's fine. Keep going. Yeah.
Everybody feel that? Well, if you don't feel that way, you can just bow out and I won't have hurt feelings. Okay. So how to make proper exposures in impossible situations. There's just, this doll sheep is in dark shade and this is completely blown out up above. So you got 2 options. You take multiple exposures and merge them digitally, or you use a graduated neutral density I use both of these, but more often than not, with my landscape photography at least, I'll use a graduated neutral density filter. Some people think that's a stupid idea, Jeff. Why not just use, I mean, we got all this technology now, just do a HDR. But I contend that I want to get the best exposure I can in the camera. So you can do this. This is, you know, the normal exposure. You can go, you guys all know about HDR. So I'll just show you that real quick and you get that. It looks great. Same thing. That's this is before sunrise. So that sky should be much darker. So that's the HDR idea. But I contend that I like to use graduated neutral density filters. So this is using a 3-stop graduated filter. Does anybody here use graduated filters? Does anybody care about graduated filters?
I do now.
Okay, so this is what a graduated neutral density filter is. How many people do use graduated filters and they're happy? Or no, just how many use them? You don't have to be happy. Anybody use them? Nobody.
I think,
No, I don't, but I sure want to know what you have to say about them.
I think
I
Deb
do.
does.
You do, okay. So we got one person that uses them?
Doesn't
Maybe there's only 4 of
some-
you left, I don't know.
Well, I
Okay.
used to use them, but I've taken to using the masking.
Yeah, yep, which
masking
works fine. Anyway, yeah, so you can do it digitally. To me, the digital can look a little funky at times. So this is like a little, I don't know, better to me way anyway. So graduated neutral density filters, this is a hard edge, this is a soft edge. It's graduating softly from clear to 2 stops or 3 stops or whatever type filter you buy. This is graduating quickly between that. So the idea is to put the bright part in the dark and just slide this up and down in a filter holder. So this situation, remember I said I go fast, go light, and go simple. I'm always carrying a photo vest or wearing a photo vest, and it has everything I need in it. I rarely carry my backpack with me when I'm out shooting because I inevitably put it down and I walk away and can't find it again. So I want to have everything right on all the time. So my filters are with me. So in this particular case, I saw the doll sheep here. I grabbed out my filters, put them on, and this happened. I mean, more sheep showed up, but I put a 3-stop graduated hard edge filter on here and I got a better exposure. Now I can put it into Lightroom and use their graduated system or masking or whatever and have a more properly exposed picture. In other words, it's taken the histogram that was like this way out here. I call it the devil's horns, where you've got a spike on the left and a spike on the right. And by using this filter, it brings that histogram closer together. So now it's got better information in there that I can go brighter or darker, whatever, without causing a headache with shadows. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay.
Absolutely.
So this is an assignment I did for a magazine for dog mushing in the summertime. Again, this particular photo is shot with a telephoto lens, and it's showing, it's all about the people here. Dogs are out of focus. It does show that it kind of does give this example, though, of the compression a little bit. All the trees look fairly close together. And then a couple seconds later, I switched to a wide angle lens. So the trees look farther apart. More of the dogs are in focus. When I photograph a magazine assignment, I have to give the art director enough variety of photos that they can, turn one into a double spread, turn one into a vertical, whatever. So I have to shoot a ton of different things. And that's what the whole idea, my journalism background is, or editorial background is what got me always using 2 camera bodies. So effective use of filters. Some people tell me that they don't even use a polarizer anymore. I contend that, well, a polarizer still does good for me, cuts the haze. In this top picture, it's probably hard for you guys to see on the screen, but you can't see any clouds at all. Here with the polarizer, at least I get a little bit of cloud action. And then using dehaze and Lightroom will bring it out even more. But to me, this is night and day without the filter on the top and with the filter on the right. I love using a polarizer, especially if I have some people just increase the blue channel or some such in Lightroom to bring out that. But if I'm shooting something that's in the sky, like an airplane, I do a lot of air-to-air photos. The polarizer just helps that airplane pop out from the sky without any manipulation. And then, of course, with streams, I love using the polarizer in order to see the rocks rather than the reflection of the sky. So that's another great time for that. And then I mentioned earlier, I love long exposure photography. This is the same image, 500th of a second or 60 seconds. Does anyone here use not but just neutral density filters? 5, 10?
Regularly, all the time.
I do.
Perfect. Yep. So I think it's a great thing. It can be overdone, but I love it. Like in this particular case, for those of you who might not, the slowest shutter speed I could get for this top frame was a 13th of a second, because I'm at ISO 100, I'm at f22. I happen to have a 3-stop graduated neutral density filter up here because this is in dark shade. But in any case, that's the longest exposure I could get. But I didn't think it was soft enough. I think I went overboard, quite frankly, but I did a 4-minute exposure with a 10-stop filter, and it made it really, really cottony look. But in any case, you can vary that length depending on what graduated or what neutral density filter you use. So I love using it for clouds. Just that little bit of difference. I used to tell the photographers I represented at Alaska Stock, and this is back in the day of film, when we would FedEx film to a client, and let's say they were looking for polar bears in a snowstorm. We would send them 20, 30, 40 pictures of polar bears in a snowstorm. We knew full well that they were getting 4 or 5 other submissions from other stock agencies or photographers, and they put them on the light table next to each other. I told my photographers, if your picture is just 1% better than all those other guys, you get 100% of the sale. So do whatever you can to make it different or better. Now, who knows what better is, because beauty is in the eye of the beholder, but at least make it different. Don't shoot the same thing everybody else is shooting. So by doing this cloud thing, to me, that's different. Same thing here. This is a 60th of a second. The water looks hard. 60 seconds, the water looks soft. Now I'm getting more into the artsy fartsy stuff than just a regular snapshot. Anybody can do that. You have to think about it to do this. This is one of my all-time favorites. This is just a snapshot to me, and you can see all this crud in the. Are you seeing your pictures on here too?
Yeah.
I should have done that a lot earlier, huh? Any case, so you can see all this crap in the lake here. So I put on a neutral density filter. Oops, gotta come back. All right, so it starts with that and goes to that. Everybody still with me?
Yes.
Okay. So to me, this is art, and this is just a snapshot. I mean, this has full depth of field. I'm using hyperfocal distance, so everything's sharp. I'm using a graduated filter up here, so it's darker, so I get an even exposure on my histogram. Yes, I will admit to it. I stepped out and put that leaf right there. So does everybody else, but I don't do it that often, but I had to in this case. Anyway, I think that's art. To me, that's just a wonderful shot.
I think we misunderstood your question. When you move the pointer up to the upper right,
Yeah.
you're probably seeing things on your screen, but we're just seeing the PowerPoint, all of it.
Oh, okay, good. You are seeing all of it. Okay,
Yeah.
great.
Yeah.
That's good to know. Thank you.
Well, point
Right.
I can make about that. I've done a lot of long exposures with cloud motion blur. I've had a number of people tell me that those give them motion sickness.
Seriously,
Seriously.
you're not just, wow, that's a new one to me. Huh. Interesting.
I say take some Dramamine and enjoy the image.
Yeah.
Get over it or die mad, right?
Yeah.
All right. So here's a case where, I mean, this took me a long time to set this up. Any case. All right. So my end game here, I bring this up because my end game is depth of field. I need f22. I need hyperfocal. Some people argue that f22 makes the image softer. I say maybe so, but I haven't noticed it in 40 years that bad. So I wanted full depth of field. I wanted good contrast in the sky, so I used the polarizer. This is in deep shade and this is in sunlight. So I wanted to bring the histogram closer together. So I'm using a 3-stop hard edge filter. So a 3-stop hard edge filter and a graduated filter at f22. f22 ISO probably 100 because that's a good idea. I was at 1/8 of a second. And when I looked at the picture, I said to myself, the water's a little too hard. It's a nice image, but it could be better. So I said, okay, well, let's just make a long exposure. So I put on a neutral, I added a neutral density filter on top of the polarizer, on top of the graduated filter. And just so you know, there's a much better way to do it this day and age, and it's called wine country camera filters. They're out of California. Any case, I put on a neutral density filter and I went to 2 minutes thinking, well, 2 minutes will be plenty of time. But look what happened. My icebergs were moving, and I didn't realize that until I looked at the image and I went, wow, they are really moving. Because even in 2 minutes, they didn't move all that much. Any case, so now what I ended up doing is I wanted to shorten the shutter speed up. Well, remember, I only have 3 things that I can use: aperture, shutter speed, and ISO. So I wanted depth of field, so I had to stay at ISO or at f22. But I wanted to shorten the shutter speed. And so I use my fingers when I do this, count. And so I went from 2 minutes to 1 minute is 1 stop, and then 30 seconds, and then 15 seconds, and then 8 seconds. So that's 4 stops of light that I went down or shortened the exposure. So I needed to increase my ISO of those 4 stops. So I went from 100 to 200 to 400 to 800 to 1600 ISO in order to get this shot. Now, again, I said to myself, well, 1600 is an awful high ISO, even anyway. So I purposely underexposed it and shot it at ISO 800 and then brought it up in Lightroom. So in any case, you can get there from here if you try hard enough and long enough. Some people say, Jeff, how easy a job do you have? You're a photographer. I mean, how easy does it get? You take pictures for a living. And I say, well, at the end of the day, my brain hurts because I'm talking, I'm thinking about all this math and f-stops and junk like that. Any case, so this is the horizontal version of the same thing. Some people argue, well, Jeff, it's nice, but it looks like it's just ice and not water now because this thing's floating on top. I say, okay, I'll buy it. But anyway, beauty's in the eye of the beholder. So putting it all together to create great images. This is a 4-minute exposure just because I wanted something different. Again, what's my end game? It's always good composition and proper focus and proper exposure. But what else is there? Show movement, only one thing in focus, everything in focus. So this thing, I wanted everything in focus. So I'm at 1/4 of a second, f22, ISO 100 at 24 millimeter. This, I'm trying to stop the action. So I'm at a 300 millimeter, 1,000th of a second, f5.6, ISO 3200. Love this shot. So I wanted some depth of field, but not so much. I wanted to see these trees behind here so that they looked like trees and weren't out of focus, but I didn't want them so sharp that it took away from this. So I'd take a picture and then I'd enlarge it on this LCD screen and just see what looked best. What looked best, what am I at here? 283 millimeter, ISO 100, f8 looked best. It just happened to be a 60th of a second. You know, so my idea was ISO 100 because it's going to be the best quality, f8 because I wanted that much depth of field. I looked at it and it just fell to be a 60th of a second. No big deal. I'm on a tripod. This shot, I wanted everything in focus. I wanted the sunburst, so f16.
Oh.
So I'm at 250 at f16, ISO 100. So that looks good to me. Now, some of you will think, now, how is it snowing with it being blue sky? So many places in America or anywhere in the world, we have what's called hoarfrost, which is frost clinging to the trees. And when I walked by this spot, I accidentally bumped this tree on the right, or on the right here. And all this hoarfrost came tumbling down. And I said, what a great idea. So I set up the picture and then I used my fist and just bumped the tree again. And the hoarfrost came down.
Mhm.
You saw this shot earlier. It's just getting enough depth of field is what I wanted, but I had to be handheld because I couldn't use a tripod because the moose are moving and blah, blah, blah. So, but even at 55 millimeter, I was far enough back at f5.6. I still had the depth of field, which I still wonder how that happened. I'm in an airplane photographing an airplane. So I'm moving around a little bit. So I'm at a fast shutter speed, f5.6 ISO 400. Just a long exposure. I used the 5-stop neutral density filter. I just kept changing lengths of time. And I ended up at a 4-second exposure is what I liked. So there you go. What's the end game? All right, so what are you going to use on your next image? What's the point? So these are just a few, this is the end. Sorry, I went way over time, but
You're
This is-
fine. Overtime is fine.
over time. Are you the only one there, Amy?
No. Our pictures.
Everybody who started still here.
Yeah.
Really? Okay, well, that's
Yeah.
encouraging. Thank
We're paying double overtime.
you. Yeah, good deal. You're getting your money's worth. I like it. All right, so this is the shot from a helicopter. You can tell how much sky I like to have. I mean, it's all about this fog on the ground here.
Mm.
Remember separation? There's our separation. We waited 45 minutes for that caribou to get up off the tundra. But we first saw the caribou, and when we saw it from the angle we were at, it was down here, you know, so to speak. So we literally walked downhill and made sure the caribou was, once it did stand up, it was going to be in the lake. So that separation is a big deal. It wouldn't have worked if the caribou was right here. It just, you know, it would have been something. But and this goes to what one of my last slides is. Anybody, most of you probably remember the saying that the street photographer in New York, what was his name? Frizzelli? I can't remember his name, but his motto, people kept asking him, how could he get these pictures, you know, so great, these street photos? And his motto was F8 and be there. Anybody remember that? F8 and
That's
be there.
good. That's good.
So that's
I
my
did that.
motto. It doesn't matter what f-stop you use or what anything you use. You got to be there and you got to be ready for the action, like we were for this. These are two sows going at it. Unbelievable. Anyway, F8 and be there. Not often do the bears scare the fish out of the water. That's pretty cool.
Mm.
Jeff, is that Brooks Falls?
No, this is a place in Lake Clark that I take my clients to, and you can go there too in 2024.
How far away are you from this bear?
Very close. The nice thing about the place I take these people is that we're in a boat. So we are really close to these bears.
Okay.
In a safe boat. Like it's a boat with only 3 people in it, a guide and 2 photographers.
Oh, wow.
It's pretty nice. So we're within, in this case, probably 75 feet,
Wow.
pretty close. So I put this photo in here because for the longest time I've had an assistant, and I would do none of my own processing. I would do the initial edit. You guys are all old enough to know what edit means instead of what they think it means nowadays. To me, edit means culling the photographs, not processing them and making them look better. In any case, so I edited the photos and I sent them to my assistant, and I just, you know, he knows what I like, so he makes things happen. It's an aerial shot of Denali. But then when he brought it back to me, he showed me this one, but he also put this one in there.
Oh,
And I just
my
went,
gosh.
oh my God,
Beautiful.
wow.
so much better. This is
Oh.
1,000 times better than the
Wow.
color.
Wow.
Yeah.
So I
Oh.
say that to say experiment, and especially experiment with black and white. They've got some great
Mhm.
presets for Lightroom and that where you can, you know, enriching things up. So F8 and be there.
Okay.
This is 14 frames a second. Look at this cub, you know, it stood up, but at 14 frames a second, it didn't it's moving right along. So
Wow.
that's the shot I chose. It's not a great, but
Mm.
shows the point.
Huh.
So know your equipment and how to use it quickly. And for us up here in Alaska, you have to know how to use it in the dark in wintertime when you're doing a night sky. Know your subject and anticipate it, the next move, and then shoot lots, edit later. So there you go. Very
Excellent.
Wow.
photography.
Wow.
In 1 hour, you made me a better photographer.
Yeah, me too. That was really exciting.
Oh,
Excellent.
And
Good.
I'm
gonna
one of
try
the
to-
I'm one of the volunteer teachers. And I thank you so much for pulling up the graphics of your f-stops and versus the time, because we have used that very same graphic. I've had that printed up on 4x6 prints, and we've handed it out to the group and tried to go to that. So I was just so happy to see you using that to explain, because we have gone over that.
Good. Yeah, that's the best tool that I've seen with f-stops and shutter speeds.
And you explained it so clearly and so very well. Thank you for all the education that you put in. When you want to ever come back again, I would love to see what camping gear or what type of clothes you're wearing to be warm enough to get out there and protect yourself from the elements.
Right. Well, funny you should mention that. There is a YouTube video with how I prepare for the winter shooting. And also, if you go to my website, schultzphoto.com, I have a gear closet there.
Oh, good. I will definitely look that up.
Resources Gear closet. And if anybody wanted to come to Alaska, since this is free, I can do a shameless plug, right?
Yeah.
Sure.
Oh, yeah.
Absolutely.
Let me do a quick thing here.
Well, we've already decided this is our next field trip.
Yeah.
Is that right? Well, good.
Already been there.
See if we can get a bus.
Yeah.
Okay, so here's my website. So
Mhm.
there's free photographer resources on it. You can buy a printer and merchandise, but no photographer in their right mind would buy from another photographer. You can look at my published work, no big deal. But if you wanted to go on Alaska photo tour, they're all booked for this coming year, but there's the 3 that I have coming up next year. They're not cheap, little under $10,000 for 7 days. But you get to go up in a helicopter a couple times and get to be up close and personal to bears.
Does that cover lodging?
Yeah, it's lodging, food, the whole 9 yards.
Oh, okay, great.
So it's not bad considering where you go.
Mhm.
But I would like you to, when you do have time, visit my personal projects. As you know, I've been the Iditarod photographer for 40 years. This Faces of Iditarod is near and dear to my heart because there's over 1,000 volunteers that make this Iditarod happen. And I got burned out photographing the same thing for so many years. So 3 years ago, I kind of retired from being the race photographer, and I went along the trail and I did these portraits of dogs, mushers, volunteers, spectators. I
Oh,
used the same studio lighting and then photographed them all. But then the cool thing about it is when you click on one of the photos, you read about who the person is or who the dog is, and then I've interviewed them. And so you can listen to their voice. And I ask them 4 questions about the Iditarod. 3 of them are about the Iditarod, how they got involved, blah, blah, blah. But the last question I ask a person, at least, I can't ask the dog or the dog's owner, and that is, what in life do you know for sure?
92, she is.
What in life do you know for sure? And when you hear this 92-year-old volunteer
Wow.
talk about what she knows for sure and just why she got involved with Iditarod. Anyway, to me, this is great. So I got over 900 of these Faces of Iditarod on there. The people who support me monthly on Patreon for a couple of bucks help support it. But they, and I also have had support from Exxon, one of the Iditarod sponsors. And anyway, this year I'm trying to reach 1,049 because that's the commemorative number of miles that are in the Iditarod is 1,049. Anyway, so if you get a chance, take a look at these Places of Alaska or Faces of Alaska. I do the same thing with Faces of Alaska, and that's I use lighting and then I interview them, but instead of a studio background, they're in the Alaska elements. One thing to note here is some of these photos I'm shooting at 20 below zero, 30 below zero
Mhm.
outdoors with the studio lighting. So anyway, go to my YouTube channel, which is off of resources, and you can learn about what I think is a good tripod, how to shoot night sky photography, a number of other things. So
Good. Oh, well, thank you. Thank you for that. You see, you've got it all done.
yeah, there you go.
That's,
That
All
was
right. Well, thanks so
great.
much for the having me here. I appreciate it, Alan. Glad we're related some way, shape, or form.
Okay,
Thank you so much.
Wonderful.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Excellent.
Thank you very much.
Thank you,
Yeah.
Alan.
Please join us
Thanks
on.
very much, Jeff.
All right.
I'll let you know my basket in Amazon is overflowing with gadgets.
what are you gonna go buy this time, Kevin?
There you go.
You mention it and Kevin has it bought before the meeting is over.
Filters.
Filters.
I think I'm interested in some filters too.
I am too. Tubbs
Same here.
Camera, our local camera store is gonna wonder what the whole run on filters is with our group election.
There you
Thank
go.
you, Jeff. Really, this was just such a special
Yeah.
lecture, and I'm so glad we have it taped so we can go back and watch it again. So
Yeah, do send me a link to that or a copy of it. I'd
Yes.
love.
We'll make sure it happens.
yeah,
All right.
yeah.
Thanks so much.
And anytime you want to get on our Facebook group, it's our private group. If you want to add anything to anything of your pictures, we would love to have them. Anything that you've got. We do a weekly challenge, but we don't expect you to keep up with that. I know you've got a lot going on.
Very good. All right. Thanks for playing.
Yeah,
you.
thank you
Thank
so
you,
much.
you.
And Alan, thank you for arranging this. It was really a fantastic lecture for us. Thank you.
you're welcome.